It's time for the Devils to play with a sense of purpose in this matchup against the New York Islanders. And it's not going to be easy, but I think they're capable of doing so. But before we talk about all that, let's talk about the injury bug that's made its way not only in Utica, but also New Jersey. We have a lot to break down in today's episode of Locked On Devils. Buckle up, everybody.
You're Locked On Devils, your daily podcast on the New Jersey Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is Bryce Salvador, and you're Locked On Devils with Trey Matthews.
Scores! Oh, Stevens stepped up, nailed it. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. The Devils win the Stanley Cup.
Alrighty now, what is up, New Jersey? Welcome back to the Locked On Devils podcast here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, college hockey play-by-play announcer, Devils writer for Pucks and Pitchforks, and also part-time credential media member, Trey Matthews. It's been a minute since I've said this sentence because they've had some time off, but it's game day for the New Jersey Devils. They are set to travel to take on the New York Islanders. It's going to be their first road game of the season, and I think it's safe to say that some impatient fans are sitting on pins and needles because let's just face the facts. The Devils have not played their best brand of hockey to open up the season. Luckily, the record doesn't reflect that. They have a record of 1-1-1, and they have 3 points on the docket. But in today's episode, we're going to start off on a bit of a down note because we're going to talk about some injuries for not only the Devils, but their minor league team, the Utica Comets, out in the AHL because some key names have been missing from the lineup. And I feel like now is the best time to bring it into the light. Then in the second segment, we're going to talk about some of the more recent line combination changes made by Lindy Ruff at a Devils practice. And I'm going to talk about a player that I haven't really talked about all that often on my show because I didn't have high expectations for, but Chris Tierney might make his Devils debut when the Devils take on the Islanders later tonight when this episode goes live. And then in the third and final segment, we'll hear from Lindy Ruff and what are his expectations going into New York. And I'll also share some of my expectations, but let's start off with the injuries. So Ben Burnell put this out there about a week ago. He said on the X app that Kevin Dineen was asked about Nolan Foote and Brian Hallinan being injured. And Dineen was quoted to say, they're not expected to play in the immediate future. Right now, it is still a long ways out. We're hoping around Thanksgiving time, we'll have a clearer picture of where their health is. Well, Canadian Thanksgiving has come and gone, so I think it's safe to say that Kevin is referring to American Thanksgiving time. So that was a bit of a shocker to a lot of people because we were just all wondering, like, when did Foote and Hallinan get injured? Because they were on the roster for Devils at some point during preseason, and now they're going to miss some significant time as they're not set to return to the sheet of ice until late November. But not only that, Shimon Nemets, one of the highly touted prospects for the Devils, a player that a lot of people have a lot of expectations for, a player that a lot of people would have been cool with if he made the opening night roster, is also sidelined, and he's been sidelined for the last few days. So Ben Burnell, once again, who covers the comments on Daily Sentinel Sports, he put out a video on the X app and showed what happened that caused Nemec to get injured. And apparently it was a bit of a dirty hit and also wrong circumstances. So Shimon Nemec is skating on the far side. He gets shoved into the boards, but unfortunately, it wasn't like his body just absorbed most of the contact. It was actually his head. So as you guys know, at a hockey rink, the fans are protected by some glass, and in front of the bench, there's no glass, obviously. But what had happened is that Nemec was coming up on the far side, and unfortunately, he hit his head where the glass starts to begin to wrap around. So wrong place, wrong time, and it was a bit of a dirty hit. So Nemec was down onto the ground. Now, that sequence took place about a week ago, similar to the Foote and Hallinan news. But the good news is that Ben shared yesterday that Nemec is in a yellow, no-contact jersey, which seems like a positive step. So I think Shimon Nemec will return to the Utica Comets sooner rather than later. So those are some of your updates for the Comets up to this point. So what are my thoughts? Well, it doesn't really affect the Devils all that much. It affects more of the Utica Comets. It's one of those instances where I'm glad that the Devils are now competing for wins, because if you're missing Foote and Hallinan, who can be decent prospects, and decent contributors for the Devils sometime down the road. That really would have hurt them if they were like a rebuilding team and they're just trying to find some prospects that really fit best with their system. But if we're being realistic here, Foote and Hallinan weren't going to be given big roles had they made the opening night roster for the Devils. And in fact, I talked about it in a recent episode that if Foote were to make the roster for the Devils, more likely than not, he would have been a healthy scratch for the most part. So that's why you bring someone like Chris Tierney onto your roster, a veteran player who's willing to be a healthy scratch because he knows what his role is. And we'll talk more about Chris Tierney in the second segment. But as for Foote, for the time being, Utica is the best place for him. I'm hoping for a speedy recovery, and same with Hallinan. And as for Nemets, I think we're going to see him back on the rink sooner rather than later. And like I said, that was a bit of a scary moment for Shimon Nemets, especially how he hit his head and how he was down onto the ground. But I'm glad that everything is looking in a positive direction. And once again, he's back to doing some no contact practice participation. And now let's shift over from Utica to now New Jersey, because the Devils might be without a couple key assets on their bottom six. So according to Ryan Novozinski, he put out an article and said that the Devils will likely be without Erik Haula, who's dealing with an upper body injury, and Tomas Nosek, who is dealing with a lower body injury, still listed day to day, but he was seen walking around with a boot against the Islanders. So my thing about Erik and Nosek is that those are two key assets for the bottom six for the Devils. Like, we obviously know what Erik can bring to the roster for New Jersey. We saw it on full display last year and during the playoffs. But one of the more underrated assets for the Devils during the offseason was Tomas Nosek, because I was actually a big fan of the signing, because while he's not exactly like Michael McLeod, because McLeod is on pace to be one of the best fourth-line centers in the NHL, according to Ken Danico, Nosek can do a little bit of what Michael McLeod is capable of doing, which is working the corners, be a bit of a spark plug, can do face-offs, things of that nature. So I was really excited to see what Nosek can bring to the Devils this year, especially since that Nosek has a ton of playoff experience. But for right now, he is listed as day-to-day. We'll see what happens. And there's another player who I've been talking about the last few days for Devils that unfortunately went down with an injury at one of the more recent practices, and that's Colin Miller. So apparently he went crashing into the boards, and then he limped his way over to the bench. Trainers were checking him out. He went back to the locker room, and after the practice, Lindy Ruff said he didn't really have a full-fledged update for Miller. So I think it's best to expect that Miller will not be making his official Devils debut against the Islanders. And that's a little disappointing to see, because like I told you guys, I really want to move Luke back to the left-handed slot, and then you insert Miller into that right-handed position, maybe make Brendan Smith a healthy scratch. But for the time being, we're just going to have to wait until after the Islanders game to see what happens. And Ruff was also unsure if Haula and Nosek would make the trip to New York. He said they could possibly, but he didn't seem all that confident. And then for Miller, like I said, no updates. So the injury bug is making its way through the Comets organization and also the Devils organization. But luckily, none of these injuries outside of Foote and Hallinan seem to be all that serious. So we'll see Erik Haula back in action sooner rather than later. I think he's listed as day-to-day. Same with Tomas Nosek. Colin Miller, I think he did return to practice. I don't think he participated, but he made his way out of the locker room. So we'll see what happens going forward. But those are your brief injury updates in regards to the Devils and also the Comets. So something I've been doing on my show a lot lately is looking at some of the line combinations that Lindy Ruff has been rolling at some of the more recent Devils practices, and giving you guys my opinion as to whether or not I would like to see that line rolled out for the next matchup for New Jersey. And let's look at what he put out there at one of the more recent Devils practice. This is courtesy of Amanda Stein. So the top line is Tyler Toffoli, Jack Hughes, Timo Meyer. Second line, Andre Palat, Nico Hischier, Jesper Bratt. Third line, Dawson Mercer, Michael McLeod, Alexander Holtz. The fourth line, and this is going to be a somewhat of a decent talking point, Chris Tierney, Curtis Lazar, Nathan Bastian. defensive pairings stay more or less the same. Siegenthaler-Hamilton on the first defensive pair, second defensive pair, Ball-Marino, third defensive pair, still Smith and Hughes. And obviously Miller was a bit of a filler, but he did get hurt like I alluded to in the first segment. So when looking at that top line for the Devils, I know a lot of people are saying, like, why did Lindy break up the TBH line? Because I saw some of the responses underneath Amanda's more recent post. And it's something I've been talking about the last couple episodes. Something has to change and some energy needs to be brought throughout the entire lineup. And when looking at some of the injuries for the Devils, like Tomas Nosek and Erik Haula, it sort of forces Lindy to spread out his weapons a little bit more. And it's something that he even talked about at one of his more recent media availabilities, which is going into the next matchup against the Islanders. He wants to give the opposition a bit of a headache in terms of defending the Devils. He wants to make the Devils a little deeper. And some of the players have played alongside each other before, whether it's 5-on-5, on the power play, whatever the circumstance is. Some examples that I listed in the latest episode is that Hughes has played alongside Meyer before. Hischier has played alongside Bratt before. And maybe we could get something out of Holtz if he's paired alongside with Mercer. We've seen that work out in the past a little bit, but Mercer was obviously the star on the third line first half of the year when he was paired alongside with Holtz and Sharangovich. But getting back to what we got currently, I still like what Lindy is rolling out. And once again, with the subtractions of Erik Haula and Tomas Nosek, this forces Lindy to spread out his weapons a little bit more. So that way he's not too top heavy and the Devils can just have some more options up and down their lineup. So when looking at the top line, Toffoli, Hughes, and Meyer, I'm perfectly okay with that. Meyer swapped over to the right wing side. I think that can also benefit him in some sort of way. And then Hughes can hopefully help out Meyer in terms of the point production. And Tyler Toffoli, once again, if he's paired alongside with Hughes, we've already seen that chemistry work out in the preseason matchups. So I think Toffoli and Hughes or Toffoli and Hischier, you can't go wrong either way. That's something I talked about during the course of the summer. Then on the second line, I talked about it in yesterday's episode, but one of my main concerns for a couple players was one, Andre Palat, and also Alexander Holtz, because while their production is not all that impressive, I know I got to be fair and say, like, are the Devils giving them the best chance to try to succeed? Because while some teams might kill to have a lineup of Andre Palat, Erik Haula, and also Alexander Holtz, that's the Devils' third line. So that's one of their bottom six units. They're not going to be seeing the most amount of ice time. So I don't think that really sets a good precedent for players like Andre Palat and also Alexander Holtz. And there's only so much that Erik Haula can do. And I already know that his production is going to be solid and he doesn't have to be spectacular. He just has to do the little things to help the Devils win. But for Holtz and Palat, they need to do some bigger things in order for their impact to be felt throughout the team and also the fan base for the Devils. So my thing is, I like that Palat is paired alongside with Hischier. I think both of them can help each other in a sense because Hischier is struggling to put up points on the board after 3 games. Same with Palat. So maybe Palat and Hischier can just feed off each other. And obviously, when you have a sniper like Bratt on your line who's been putting up some good point production the last few games, I think that can do a lot of good for both Hischier and Palat. We'll see how that works out. And then for Dawson Mercer, he's off to a bit of a slow start himself. But let's face it, I think he could be more of an offensive weapon than Andre Palat and also Erik Haula. And that's not a knock at Haula. I'm just saying, like, Haula, while he does have a couple goals to open up the year, I think his main priority is just doing some other things to help the team win because he's a very unselfish player. But for Mercer, he's an offensive, dynamic player, and maybe that can help Alexander Holtz as well. So Holtz can feed it over to Mercer. Mercer could try to finish, and this gives Mercer a chance to sort of break away from Hughes and Hischier and try to take command of his own line, because while McLeod is the center, McLeod is not going to generate that much offense, and it's not his job to do so. It is Mercer's job as the best offensive player on that line to generate those points, and I think that can help Holt, and we already know what McLeod can do. But I think a big X factor for the Devils is going to be that fourth line, which consists of Chris Tierney, Curtis Lazar, and Nathan Bastian, because I'll talk more about this in the third segment, but aggression is going to be needed against this Islanders team. There's no ands, ifs, or buts about it. And with the subtraction of Haula and Nosek, this gives Chris Tierney a chance to make his Devils debut and have his impact somewhat felt, because he's been in the league for quite some time and maybe he's looking for a chance to showcase his skill set. But I think for Tierney, I just want him to be aggressive and I just want him to be solid and just don't be a liability out there. So Tierney recently shared post-practice like what he hopes to bring to the roster. Here's what he had to say.
We saw you taking some line rushes. If you are able to play tomorrow, what do you really want to bring to this lineup?
Just try to bring some energy, whenever you get in the lineup, and obviously if you're in the bottom six, I think you want to go out and create energy for the team. So just moving my feet, getting on pucks quick, trying to win puck battles, and just helping out wherever I can.
The Islanders are a team that are consistently very tough to play against. They're very physical. They throw a lot of hits. What can the fourth line potentially bring to counteract that? Yeah,
I think we got to do the same. I think we got to get on their D and get physical and get pucks back. If we can get the puck behind them, make them turn, wear them down a little bit, maybe soften up some minutes for the top guys. So I think that's kind of the role, is to try to get some momentum, and the more we can kind of play down there and have the puck and cycle, the more momentum we're going to create for our team.
I'm not going to repeat what he said, but I think we all heard it at some point during that soundbite. So I'm just going to say this, Chris, you might want to rephrase it a little bit. But anyway, on a more serious note, I just want him to bring energy. I want him to just be not too chaotic for his own good, because I want him to sort of bring what Miles Wood was capable of bringing, and also what I expect from Curtis Lazar, which is be physical, try to work the Islanders really hard, but at the same time, don't be chaotic for your own good, because one of my big talking points for the Devils going into this matchup against the Islanders is try to limit the amount of times you go to the penalty box, because the PK hasn't been all that effective for the Devils to open up the season. So we'll see what happens, but I think Chris knows like what his role is, and I think he's going to try to be as solid as he can be. So we'll see what happens, but I did not expect for Tierney to make the opening night roster. I thought the signing of him over the summer was just a way for Utica to get some more depth at the center position, but obviously Tierney is capable of playing a winger position. We'll see what happens. So I don't have the official lineup at the time of this recording, so I am expecting for Tierney to make his Devils debut with Nosek and Haula on the injured list and not expected to travel with the team. So we're going to talk about my expectations for the Devils against the Islanders momentarily. But before we continue, I want to tell you guys about Jase Case, because it provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use. All it takes to get a Jase Case is to fill out a simple online form, and in some cases, jump on a quick call with one of the board-certified physicians. Get ongoing care from your physician on any treatment-related questions. Doctor created, doctor recommended. Don't get caught unprepared. Everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during unprecedented times. Jase handles everything from online evaluations to licensed pharmacy medication delivery and ongoing consultation and care. Jase Medical now offers customizability for your Jase Case with dozens of add-on medications. Choose the medications that best fit you and your family's unique needs. Jase is continually working to expand their medication offerings. In those recent efforts, they've added ivermectin, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, as an option in the Jase Case. So go to jasemedical.com and enter the code LOCKEDON at checkout for a $20 discount on your order. That's promo code LOCKEDON at jasemedical.com. And now, let me tell you guys about FanDuel, because I want you guys to make some extra money this NHL season. So right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet, because you need to snap back into the Taylor Swift League or the NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. That's $200 once again in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action, because the app is easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over and unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL. Visit FanDuel.com, and why don't you bet on the Devils, money lines, props, etc. But please remember to do so responsibly. Okay, so to close out today's episode, let's talk about some expectations going into the matchup against the New York Islanders. Here's what Lindy Ruff had to say post-practice in terms of what the Devils can expect.
What problems does a team like the Islanders present to you, and what do you need to be prepared for tomorrow night?
Well, I think they play, they play a strong game away from the puck. Don't give you a lot of opportunities. I think their defensive game is really strong. So I think the opportunity for us to take advantage of chances we get is going to be real important.
So it's been very evident to start off the year, at least, that the Devils have been missing their swagger. They've been missing that sense of urgency. And we saw it during the preseason. In fact, they played the Islanders twice during the preseason. So if they're able to sort of repeat what they were able to do during the preseason, I think they're going to be just fine. Because if you guys recall, in the final preseason game, the Devils didn't even suit up any of their best players. I think the best player on the rink, arguably, was Dawson Mercer, because Jack Hughes didn't play, Nico Hischier didn't play, Timo Meier didn't play, Jesper Bratt didn't play, and he was on a tear during preseason. And yet the Islanders were suiting up some guys that normally would play in an NHL game. So the fact that the Devils' C team was able to beat that Islanders, I guess, A or B team, I think that was an impressive victory, albeit it was preseason. You got to take it with a grain of salt. But it goes back to my point, which is the Devils need to come out aggressive. And that's why I talked about that bottom six pairings of being crucial X factors in this matchup, because here's what I want the Devils to do. They need to set the tone early. And yes, we focus on the top six players, but let's focus on some of those players that could be somewhat aggressive and just ruffle the feathers up on the Islanders just a bit, because this is a scrappy team. They may be old, but they are scrappy, and they're not afraid to get underneath their opponent's skin. So that's the one thing that the Devils need to do. They need to play with a sense of purpose from the opening face-off draw. No more lackadaisical first periods with the hopes of maybe picking it up halfway through period number 2 and also period number 3. No, play aggressively from start to finish, but be smart about it, because one of the things I said is that I want the Devils to stay out of the penalty box, because that's not going to do them any sort of justice. So that's my thing. 2 X factors that I see for this Devils team going up against the Islanders is, one, their aggressive nature throughout the entirety of the lineup and playing with that sense of urgency, and also just seeing what their bottom six, particularly that fourth line that consists of Tierney, Lazar, and Bastian, let's see if they can also rack up the hits and just rack up the aggression and see what they can do in terms of just asserting themselves for this Devils team. Because once again, Devils need to stop playing so soft, and they need to put their foot on the gas pedal, go 100 miles per hour, and not look back. So that's some of my basic thoughts that have been lingering in my head going into this matchup against the Islanders. Looking forward to it. And once again, guys, I know the Devils aren't off to the best of starts, but even if they do lose this game, nobody's clinching tomorrow. So we'll see what happens. But as for today's episode, that's all the time I have for you. So continue to stay safe. Have a wonderful day, New Jersey. Go Devils. Let me know what you guys think about the Devils missing some assets in Utica and also on the NHL roster in terms of injury. And also let me know what you think about the line combinations, Chris Tierney, and what are your expectations going into this matchup against the Islanders. If you're listening on a podcast streaming service, hit me up on my personal X Page app at TreyMatt4 and the show's X Page app at Locked On Devils. Once again, I will catch you guys in the next episode. Thanks for listening once again.